Saving America one entrepreneur at a time. It's the Biz Wrap Podcast with your host, Michael Manahan.
It's Biz Wrap Radio, the show that celebrates entrepreneurs and small business with your host, small businessman, educator, and author, Michael Manahan.
And welcome to another edition of Biz Wrap Radio. I'm your host, Michael Manahan. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I've got a great show lined up for you. If you are new to Biz Wrap Radio, we are the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. Yes, we're here helping the small business people of America fight the good fight, do what they do so well, which is create jobs. Yeah, you know, I know there's some folks in Washington that would like you to think that it's the politicians that create the jobs, but no, it's actually small business people. It's not even the big corporations. You know, if you ever read the Wall Street Journal, you'll see it seems every week there's some big corporation, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, General Motors, slashing jobs and laying people off. But most people in the United States actually work for a small business, and most small businesses create the new jobs. And so Biz Wrap Radio, we're here trying to help small business people do a better job of what they do, make more money. Yeah, it's called profits. It's not a dirty word. You're supposed to make profits. You take those profits, you grow your business, you take care of your family, you take care of your employees, and many of the small business people I know also take care of their community. They're involved in the Little League. They're involved in at the church. They're involved at the Civic Center. The fabric of the American community is small business people. So we're here to help you. But today, a topic that is really dear to my heart, we're going to be talking about taxes. No, we're not talking about the taxes that you pay to the folks in Washington, and we're not talking about income tax today. We're talking about something that causes small businesses a lot of aggravation, and that is sales tax. And I'm so lucky to have with me on the line today Brian Greer. Brian is with Tax Connect. Brian, thank you for being on the show today.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell me, what exactly is Tax Connect? What do you guys do?
Sure. As you just described, we do focus in the sales and use tax industry. And specifically, what we aim to do is act as and really become an outsourced sales tax department for those small and mid-sized businesses. We certainly recognize that collecting and remitting tax across a variety of states and jurisdictions can be very time-consuming and burdensome for businesses. And rather than hiring an internal staff person to manage that process internally, we become that outsourced sales tax department and just take care of the entire sales process for that small and mid-sized business.
Okay, so that's kind of an interesting concept. Basically, instead of the company filing its own tax, it's kind of like, I guess, with payroll. I know today very few companies actually file their payroll reports. They hire a service like ADP or Paychex or some other payroll service, and that payroll service not only pays the employees, but it calculates all the taxes that need to be paid, and it pays those taxes to the state, to the federal government, and it also completes all the complicated forms that have to be filled out and submitted. So you're kind of now doing the same thing with sales tax.
Yeah, that's right. We sometimes even describe it as, we're the ADP of sales tax. I'd say one of probably the primary exception to that or differences is that we're really primarily a service-oriented firm. So as such, what that means is we help companies really understand what their sales tax requirements are on the front end of what those requirements would be in terms of whether they should collect or remit the sales tax. And then we also help on the back end in terms of the remittance of those sales taxes. The difference being we don't have the the technology solution that would plug into the invoicing system to calculate the sales tax, but we help companies evaluate the necessity for that type of software and even help implement that software.
Well, this whole sales tax issue has become increasingly complicated. I mean, many people are familiar with the issue that Amazon had. And Amazon, of course, big internet retailer. They're shipping stuff all over the country, and they're not collecting sales tax in all of the various jurisdictions. But, of course, many of the state governments went after Amazon, and now it's my understandingAmazon is actually collecting the sales tax from most of the jurisdictions into which it sells. Is that your understanding, Brian?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. And really, what happens with Amazon is the requirement to collect and remit the sales tax is related to where they have sales tax nexus. And so what we've seen over the years, especially with Amazon, is with a desire to hopefully achieve same-day shipping. So when a consumer purchases something through an Amazon website, hopefully they can receive it the same day. That's not where we are today, but I think that's what Amazon's goal is. And as they build out warehouses in various states to enable that strategy, those warehouses are creating sales tax nexus and the need to therefore collect and remit the sales tax in those different states.
Well, I mean, obviously Amazon is a huge corporation, and they've got armies of accountants and bookkeepers and people involved in this stuff. But today there's so many small retailers who are selling over the internet. I mean, I got an associate of mine. Basically, he's a one-man show. He operates out of his condo. He keeps all of his supplies and all of his product in one of those storage facilities. But he is shipping literally not only to every state in the United States. He ships into Canada. He ships into Europe. He's got a little specialty product that he designed and he has manufactured for him. Now, how does he maneuver through these complex tax regulations, and should he be, for instance, collecting sales tax, I don't know, in Illinois and paying the sales tax to the Illinois state government?
Sure. Based on the way you describe the business, and obviously it's just an overview of how he operates, he may only have the requirement to collect the sales tax in his home state. And again, it comes back to this concept of where does a business have sales tax nexus. So if that small internet retailer is managing all their inventory or holding their inventory, in their garage or in their home office, and they're not stepping foot into other states and they don't have inventory sitting in these other states, there's a good potential that they only have nexus in their home state and therefore only have to collect and remit the sales tax in their home state. Where it can become, of course, very complicated for a business is if they start to create sales tax nexus in these other states. And they can do that without realizing it in some situations. A lot of small and mid-sized businesses will use the Amazon FBA program, the Fulfillment by Amazon. And what happens in those situations is the small or mid-sized business will ship their product to Amazon to store in their warehouse, and then Amazon will ship that product out to the various consumers or customers of that small business. But what Amazon ends up doing is moving that inventory from warehouse to warehouse in order to speed up that delivery cycle that I mentioned earlier. And when that inventory now is sitting in these multiple Amazon warehouses, that can create nexus for that small business where they may not realize it. Now they could have nexus in 20 or more states where Amazon has the various warehouses that they leverage.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And I want to get into that in a little more detail because clearly this is something that a small business person really needs to be aware of. It is your host, Mike Manahan, BizRap Radio. I am speaking with Brian Greer. Brian is with Tax Connect, and they are a firm that assists companies in maneuvering their way through the world of sales tax. We're going to be right back after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Mike Manahan, and thanks for sticking with us. If you just joined us, we are speaking with Brian Greer. Brian is with Tax Connect. His company basically provides sales tax consulting and works as an outsourced, if you will, entity that will actually remit and the various sales taxes that you might have to pay in different states. And again, Brian, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks again, Mike, for having me.
So we were just talking about this thing called sales tax nexus and what can create that. And for people who don't know what they're not familiar with that word nexus, really, when it comes to sales tax, and Brian, do correct me if I'm incorrect here, but it's my understanding all it means is nexus means that there is something that the state government can point to that to them indicates you might be doing business in their state. And if you're doing business in their state, they have a right by the rules and the laws that are set up in that state to force you to collect sales tax from your customers and then remit that sales tax to some state board, some taxing board. Is that basically, have I described that correctly, Brian?
Yeah, that's pretty close, Mike. It's really just a some type of connection to that state. You know, as you described, it's a connection that's sufficient enough that state can now require that business to adhere to their sales tax rules.
Now, traditionally, I would have thought, okay, you'd have to have a location. I'm here in California. I've got an office. I decide to expand to Nevada. I go out to Nevada, and I open up an office. I rent some space. Now I'm doing business there. But you're telling me just having inventory sitting in an Amazon warehouse could potentially create nexus and put me in a position where I potentially could have to collect sales tax in that particular state.
That's right. In as you described, having the office or the employee, those are scenarios that most businesses are aware of. You know, they know where they have employees. They know if they have an office sitting in a location. They certainly know if they have their own warehouse with inventory sitting in that warehouse. But where we do see some companies where they're surprised is the Amazon situation in terms of that inventory sitting in an Amazon warehouse, or even so much as traveling into a state could create sales tax nexus for that business. It could be traveling into the state to meet with a customer or meet with a prospect. Just depending on how often that type of activity occurs, a business could trigger sales tax nexus and not realize it.
Wow, that is amazing. And what about this? Because I know a lot of small companies market their products and services at things like trade shows or at events. And, you know, I know a couple of people that seems every week they're on the road. I'm in Chicago this weekend. I'm in Atlanta next. You know, at some particular show or event trying to drum up business for their company. Does that create nexus?
It certainly can. And that is one of the activities that we would look at or consider for a business in terms of those trade show activities. As you may have seen, and certainly the audience has probably seen if they've looked at any type of sales tax rules from state to state, they can be extremely different and varied from state to state. So just as a result of exhibiting at a trade show, it may create nexus in one state, but it may not in others. What we tend to see is that there are certain states, California is one, that has some very specific rules around exhibiting at trade shows. And I believe it's a 10-day grace period in California. So meaning a business can attend or exhibit at a trade show for up to 10 days in a calendar year and not create sales tax nexus. Other states won't have that specific call-out. I think of a state like Michigan, for example, very specifically says 1 day of really any type of activity in their state is sufficient enough to create sales tax nexus. So really, any business that is exhibiting at these trade shows, they at least need to have their radar go off and start asking the question, is this activity creating nexus for me in this particular state?
Well, now you and your company, you're obviously experts at this stuff. So if I own a business and I'm worried about this, I could call you guys and you would come in and look at my business and what I do and where I go and give me an opinion. Yes, you should be paying sales tax here, or no, you don't have to pay sales tax there. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Well, wow, that's an extremely valuable service. So somebody listening right now, how do they get a hold of you, Brian?
Sure, really a couple of different options. Our website is taxconnex.com, and that's TAXCONNEX.com. And as Mike mentioned, we do have various white papers and various questionnaires that could help you as well. Certainly there's detailed contact information on that website as well in terms of phone numbers if you want to reach out and have that conversation. Always happy just to talk with people on the phone, and if I can help, just over the phone, so be it. If it's something that requires a little bit more research or effort, then we can certainly talk about that as well.
Okay, so then in addition to kind of guiding people as to where they should be paying tax and where they shouldn't, if we decide, for instance, okay, we should be paying in Michigan, as you just mentioned, then you would kind of help us through that process in terms of what we need to be collecting from our customers and then what forms we need to be completing in order to do it properly.
That's right. And if you think about, again, what would happen from an overall sales tax perspective if you had an employee at your office 100% focused on sales tax, we would help manage that process and those steps along the way, meaning do you have nexus in a particular state? Is what you're doing, is it taxable? Meaning you could have nexus for sales tax purposes, but maybe what you're selling or whom you're selling it to, it might be not subject to sales tax. We can certainly help with that determination. And then the registration activity, getting the business registered with that state, and then the ongoing process of preparing and filing returns as well. The other aspect of this would be, of course, calculating the sales tax. And depending on the business, if they're selling specifically through Amazon, Amazon has some great tools that will already calculate sales tax on those various transactions. If you tell it to, they're certainly not going to recommend or advise you in that area, but we could certainly recommend and have Amazon start charging sales tax on those transactions for those businesses.
Okay, so here's a question I'm sure that listeners it's on the tip of their tongue. What does this cost? So how do you, and it's obviously probably depends on the situation, but just in general, how do you make money? How do you charge for your services?
Sure. If it's strictly a consulting-oriented service, like a nexus evaluation or just helping someone identify what their requirements are, I do my best to have those be flat fee engagements. I think there's always, some level of apprehension about an open hourly type of engagement. So I really aim to identify the scope up front, get agreement for the scope, and just have a flat fee engagement to help people. On a recurring basis, if I'm engaged as that ongoing outsourced sales tax department, very similarly, we would just identify what the flat monthly fee would be to manage sales tax. So I think it's helpful for both parties, myself and certainly the customer, to know exactly what it is they're getting into up front, and there's no surprises, and it's just simple and easy that way.
Well, that sounds great. So I could give you a call up and just say, hey, Brian, look, here's our company. We got a concern about sales tax. Can you just do an analysis? You'll give me some kind of, after getting some more details, obviously, about our business, you'll give me a flat price, $1,000, $10,000, $5, whatever it is, and then we go to it. That sounds pretty convenient. There's a question I want to ask you that relates to actually completing the forms and filing the documents in these various states, but we've got literally 30 seconds here before we have to go to commercial break. So once again, give out your contact information if somebody wants to get a hold of you.
Sure. Best place is the website, which is taxconnex.com, and it's taxconnex.com.
Fantastic. It is Mike Manahan, your host, Biz Rap Radio. We're talking with sales tax expert Brian Greer from Tax Connect. You've got to check these guys out. Make sure you're not or you're collecting the sales tax you're supposed to be collecting and paying it to the correct taxing authority. We'll be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thank you so much for sticking with me today. If you just joined the show, we are talking with sales tax expert Brian Greer from Tax Connect. And Brian, once again, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
So we were talking about the fact that a business may have what's called nexus in a particular state, which means that there's some connection or relationship to that state that would entitle that state to collect sales tax from them, and that one of the things your firm does is you can advise a business as to if they do have nexus, if they should be collecting sales tax, and then if you decide, yes, we should be collecting sales tax in, say, Michigan, you can help us figure out how much to collect, who to pay it to, what forms to use, and all the rest. But I always worry that if you start to file forms in a particular state, let's say it's Michigan, we make a couple of sales into Michigan, we collect the sales tax, we file the appropriate forms, we pay the Michigan government the money, and then now we're in their system. And the state of Michigan now sees us, that we exist, and is going to start coming after us for all other sorts of state compliance issues. Who knows? It could be income tax. It could be employee reports. It could be workers' comp things. And all of a sudden, our mailbox is going to be absolutely full with all of these various forms from every department in the state of Michigan. Do you find that happens?
It's certainly a risk and certainly something to be aware of. And what I try to do when we start working with a business, and certainly if we start filing in a particular state for sales tax purposes, is I want to make sure that we are aware of the possibility of those other types of issues that you've described. And what I mean by that is we'll often work with other CPA firms. And I don't want to make this sound even more complicated for a small business, but there are some additional steps that I think need to be considered. Whereas I focus specifically in the sales tax area, there are certainly counterparts of mine or other professionals that focus on income tax and other types of tax issues. So it's very possible that a business could have a sales tax reporting requirement, but not have an income tax reporting requirement. And I think it's good for a business to know that before we step foot into that state, before we hold up our hand and say, hey, we're going to start filing sales tax in your state. So it's a risk to be aware of, and something that I think just needs to be talked about and considered before you jump headfirst into signing up for a sales tax ID in a state.
Yeah, I worked with a company that hired an employee in New York, and it was just one employee. I mean, everybody else was working in California. I think we had 60, 70 employees here in California. All of our business was done in California with this one guy in New York, and I can't even remember why we hired the guy in New York. All of a sudden, we start to, of course, we have to collect tax and what have you off of his salary, remit it to the state of New York. I swear, we must have had 35 agencies from the state of New York calling us up, browbeating us, threatening us, fill out these forms, fill out those forms. They wanted demographic information on our employees and all manner of stuff. And, I mean, literally, you know what we ended up doing? We ended up getting rid of that employee simply because of the requirements that the state of New York was forcing us to go through to have one employee there. We said, forget it. We won't have employees in New York. And then once we didn't have the employee anymore, they stopped bugging us.
Yeah, it really is a sad state of affairs as you describe it like that. And it's something that we see, I don't want to say frequently, but I definitely see it where people have gone through that same scenario. You know, they hire that person, and then all of a sudden the regulatory and the tax obligations associated with having that person in the state becomes just overwhelming for them. So I wish it weren't as complicated as it is for any business, but certainly for that small and mid-sized business that, you know, they don't have the tax or the accounting staff to manage that effectively. It's just an unfortunate burden for them.
Well, hopefully some of, I don't know, maybe we'll get lucky and some government official is actually listening to this and may rewrite some of the rules and regulations. But let's say that I don't think that I should be collecting sales tax in any other state. I'm located in California, which is where I am, and I just don't think I should. I don't think I've done anything to create nexus. But all of a sudden, I start getting letters from, I don't know, the state of Texas saying that you should be collecting sales tax and we want to see your business records and do all of this stuff. What right does that does the government, say, of Texas have with respect to me as a California corporation? Can they demand this stuff out of me, or can they come to their own conclusion and say, we believe you're doing business in the state of Texas, therefore you have to do this and the other thing, or can I just ignore them?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure to what extent it becomes a legal question. Certainly, if they're just requesting information in terms of federal tax returns or this piece of information or that piece of information, I'd be very hesitant to reveal that. Now, what I do see happen quite often is, in your example, maybe Texas sends a sales tax nexus questionnaire to you, and now they're just asking you to answer certain questions on that questionnaire. And it'll be some of the questions or items that we've talked about thus far in terms of, do you have employees in the state? Do you have inventory in the state? You know, these various nexus creating activities, I would not be surprised if you get that type of questionnaire, at which point you do have, and I think you should feel obligated to complete that as accurately as you can. If you believe it's going to have an adverse, let's say, outcome to the business in terms of, oh my gosh, if I answer the question this way, they're going to conclude that I have sales tax nexus and now I have a bigger issue on my hands, I would certainly at that point immediately try to get some support from a business like mine just to help answer that questionnaire. In the past, we would see those as general fishing expeditions by the states, and a lot of times if you would ignore them, you would never get any follow-up from the state. But over the last probably 5 to 10 years, states have become more efficient in tracking who's responded to those nexus questionnaires, and I wouldn't be surprised if you get a second or third inquiry. So I don't think you can ignore that type of request from a state, but just a general request for certain tax documents or other information, I would tend to try to ignore that.
And this is where I'll give you a little bit of advice as well. As listeners know, in addition to being a professor of finance and accounting, I am the chief financial officer of a couple of companies. I have been a chief financial officer of numerous companies over the years in my 35-plus year career in accounting and finance. be very careful who completes these forms, because if any form coming from a government agency should be looked at, but the highest level in your organization, you should be looking at it as the owner. Don't leave it to some clerk to complete, because clerks don't understand the ramifications, and a lot of times don't even understand the questions, and so you give it off to some clerk to complete. And the first thing they do is they answer the questions incorrectly, or in a way that now causes you all sorts of problems from that particular government agency. So you want to make sure that those forms, you look at them, you complete them. Don't leave it to some clerk. And I'll give you an example. I have a company that I was working with. The company is located in a city in the greater Los Angeles area. They got a tax notice from the city of Los Angeles. They're not in the city of Los Angeles. They handed it off to some clerk. She filled out the forms, and they were just about to write a check for a little over $100,000 to the city of Los Angeles for business tax, and they weren't even in the city of Los Angeles. So you really have to be careful. Okay, Brian, we are again coming up on a commercial break. Quickly, how can somebody get a hold of you if they're interested?
Sure. Website again is taxconnex.com, TAXCONNEX, and there's various contact information on there in terms of if you want to reach out and have a direct phone conversation, you can find that information on the website as well.
Great. It's Mike Manahan, your host, Biz Rap Radio, and we'll be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Mike Manahan. Today we are talking with Brian Greer of Tax Connect, and we've been talking about sales tax and the complexities of sales tax and how you, as a business, may be doing business in another state, and you may, or maybe you should be collecting sales tax in that other state and paying the sales tax to the state government. Again, Brian, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's been a great discussion so far.
Yeah, really good. So, and by the way, just to the listening audience, this is something that I'm not a big fan. People listen to the show. I'm not a big fan of always bringing in an expert. There's a lot of things that you can do and maneuver your way through in this world if you have half a brain, and the idea of paying people a lot of money just to do something that you could do yourself. I'm never a big believer in that, but but on the other hand, some things really are complex enough and tricky enough that you really need to bring in somebody who knows what they're doing. And just as I wouldn't recommend you go in front of the judge without having your attorney there, I would highly recommend that if you are concerned about sales tax and the possibility that you should be collecting sales tax in other states, you need to bring in an expert and talk to somebody who knows what they're doing. And, of course, Brian Greer and his firm is just the type of people you should be talking to. Now, Brian, let's say I've been doing business for many years, and I should have been collecting sales tax in a particular state. I didn't, and maybe it was intentional, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just didn't really understand all of these complex rules and regulations. But now I go, we really should be paying sales tax, I don't know, to the state of Kentucky. How do I handle the fact that I maybe should have collected tax on sales I made last year, the year before that, and I didn't? If I all of a sudden start paying sales tax now, am I opening myself up to the risk that they could come in and say, hey, well, you were been doing business for 4 or 5 years. Now you need to send us a whole bunch more money. What is the risk there?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very common question. And a lot of times it is a business that just didn't realize what the rules were. They weren't trying to do anything improperly, but they've now come to the conclusion that, yes, they should have been collecting and remitting in the past. The issue a business faces is that without being registered for sales tax purposes, there is no statute of limitations that's running. Meaning, if they are identified through one of those nexus questionnaires that we were talking about earlier, there's a potential that a state could go back and assess the tax due as well as penalties and interest for essentially as long as they want, or as long as nexus has been in that particular state. So there's a huge risk there to the business. There are opportunities in every state to have some type of voluntary disclosure that would limit the amount of tax due, that would limit or eliminate the penalties due as well. There could be amnesty opportunities for a particular business if they've had some type of prior sales tax liability. So I think it's always a good idea to understand what that risk is historically before you decide what to do in terms of, do you execute or move through some type of disclosure, or is there an amnesty opportunity within the state, or do you just start collecting and remitting? Based on that level of risk and exposure, you could have different ways to start your compliance process in that individual state.
Now, is that something also that you could help with? Could you approach the state without divulging the name of my company as an example and, say in general terms, hey, we've got a company that's just contacted us. They think they potentially should have been collecting in your state. They didn't. Can you cut them a deal or something like that before they actually know who I am?
That's absolutely correct. In most states, there is that opportunity to approach anonymously. There are a couple of exceptions to that. I believe New York, I think we were talking about New York earlier with the employee in the state. They're pretty challenging to work with just from the perspective that there is not an opportunity to approach New York on a voluntary basis on a anonymous basis like that. But most of the other states, you can anonymously approach the state, really work out what the arrangement is going to be in terms of the tax due and the payment due prior to divulging who that taxpayer is. And that certainly has a good deal of comfort to a taxpayer to go through that process, before you have to divulge who that taxpayer is.
And that's good news. So if you're concerned about that, if you're running a business and you think maybe we should have been doing it that way, there is an opportunity in some states at least to come clean, and again, somebody like Brian can help you do that. Now, Brian, one of the things that irks me is the very complexity of this sales tax stuff. I have one of my client companies performs service, and they go to the facility because they're servicing equipment that's installed at the facility. The equipment cannot be taken out and sent back to their factory. They have to send their technician out there. They charge, and they basically have to charge sales tax wherever they do this service work. And if you get into a state like Oregon, I mean, my God, every city's got a different sales tax rate. So they literally have to know and be able to report back to the state of Oregon, all of these, and excuse me, but maybe the state of Washington, but it's one or the other. But all of these complex different rates, how do you recommend companies handle that, or is it just something you've got to do?
Yeah, in a situation like that, and I referenced earlier that Tax Connects, we're not necessarily a technology firm. There are some great solutions from a technology perspective that can provide either an automated tax calculation opportunity or simply updated tax rates that can be fed into an ERP system. I think those are generally the two options for calculating tax in a lot of those local jurisdictions, because you're right, there's not always just a state level sales tax rate. There could be a county level, a city level, and even a district level tax. And so I think you either need to have some type of tax rate subscription service, which can be fairly inexpensive, $1,000 or so on a yearly basis, or have some type of software that can help calculate the tax as well. We've talked a little bit about Amazon. In that type of situation, Amazon has the tax calculation already built into their service line so that you just tell it to calculate the tax in a state, and it does that for you. But in that business that you're describing, you may need some type of tax rate subscription service or some type of software that integrates into the ERP system.
Brian, I'm sorry to say we're out of time. That's all the time we have today. Very interesting discussion. We've been talking with Brian Greer of Tax Connect. Brian, once again, how does somebody get hold of you?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. Website is taxconnex.com, taxconnex.com.
Fantastic. It is your host, Mike Manahan, Biz Rap Radio. You know, here at Biz Rap Radio, we're fixing the United States of America through a fundamental concept that individuals pursuing their own economic interests in free markets will create more prosperity for more people than can ever be achieved through government regulations and a planned economy. And I will be back again next week with another edition of Biz Rap Radio.